She bought a thrift store to outrun her grief. The box behind the counter was locked and waiting. Inside, $15 million and her mother's first love. Some legacies don't belong to the living. What would you do if the truth cost forgiveness? The keys to the Holloway arrived in a padded envelope 3 weeks before Miriam Ashford actually used them. She kept them on her kitchen counter, next to the unopened condolence cards, the stack of her mother's forwarded mail, the electric bill she hadn't paid. Small metal teeth on a ring, cold when she touched them. Heavy in a way that had nothing to do with weight. 6 months after Nell died, Miriam stood in front of the thrift store she'd bought without ever stepping inside. The Holloway sat at the edge of a coastal town that felt like it was always exhaling. Salt air, fog that never quite burned off. The low hum of waves 2 streets over. The storefront was narrow, wedged between a closed bakery and a laundromat that smelled like burnt lint. The sign above the door was hand-painted, faded to the color of old bruises. Someone had loved this place once, before it became inventory no one wanted. Miriam didn't love it. She wasn't sure she loved anything anymore, but she'd signed the papers, paid in cash from the sale of her mother's house. Told herself it was practical. A failing business. Cheap rent. Something to do with her hands that wasn't sorting through Nell's things, or lying awake at 3 a.m., wondering why grief felt less like sadness and more like suffocation. She unlocked the door. The smell hit her first. Dust and mothballs and old wood polish, the kind that leaves a waxy film on your fingertips. Underneath that, something fainter. Lavender maybe, or the ghost of it. The air inside was thick, unmoving, like the building had been holding its breath. Miriam stepped in and let the door close behind her. Racks of donated clothes lined the walls. Floral dresses, corduroy jackets, sweaters with pilled elbows. Shelves sagged under the weight of mismatched dishes. Paperback novels with cracked spines. Picture frames holding strangers' faces. Everything was layered in a fine gray film, soft as ash. When she touched the edge of a table, it came away on her skin. Dust motes hung in the late afternoon light, suspended in the single beam slanting through the front window. They didn't move, just floated there, caught. Miriam felt like one of them. She walked slowly through the narrow aisles, trailing her fingers along surfaces. Velvet, ceramic, tarnished brass. The textures grounded her, reminded her she was still solid, still here, even when most days she felt like she was dissolving at the edges. The back office was smaller than she expected. A metal desk, a filing cabinet, a corkboard pinned with receipts that curled at the corners. The previous owner had left in a hurry. Half a cup of coffee still sat on the desk. A ring of mold floating on the surface like a tiny, abandoned island. That's when she saw it. A donation box, wooden, about the size of a suitcase, sitting on the floor beside the desk. It had a brass lock, tarnished green at the edges, and no label. No name. No note explaining what it was or why it was still here. Miriam crouched down, ran her hand over the top. The wood was smooth, worn soft by years of hands. She tried the lid. Locked. Something tightened in her chest. Not curiosity. Not yet. Just awareness. The way you feel when you walk into a room and know someone was just there. A presence. An absence that still hums. She stood, brushing the dust from her palms, and that's when she noticed the tape. Under the lip of the register counter. A small piece of yellowed packing tape, curling at one corner. She peeled it back. A brass key fell into her hand. It was small, old-fashioned, the kind that opens jewelry boxes or diaries, or things meant to stay closed. Attached to it was a white paper tag, edges softened with age, ink faded but still legible. October the 14, 2023. Miriam stopped breathing. October 14 was 1 week before her mother died. The key felt heavier now. She turned it over in her palm, watching the dim light catch the brass, turning it gold for half a second before the shadow swallowed it again. Nell had been here, in this store, 1 week before the stroke that took her while she slept. Quiet. Painless, the doctor said, like she'd simply decided not to wake up. Nell, who never mentioned the Holloway, who lived 40 miles inland and hadn't set foot in this town in decades, as far as Miriam knew. Nell, who left no note, no explanation. Just a house full of books and a daughter who didn't know how to ask the questions she should have asked years ago. Miriam looked back at the donation box. It was heavy when she tried to lift it. Not just full, weighted, like someone had packed it with intention, with care, with something that mattered enough to lock away. She set it on the desk. Dust motes swirled around it, catching the light, circling like they were guarding something. Miriam didn't open it. Not yet. She placed the brass key beside the box, lined them up so they were parallel, so they made sense together, even though nothing about this made sense. Then she backed away, slowly, like the box might follow her if she turned too fast. The light outside was fading. The dust motes were still suspended, floating, waiting. Miriam locked the front door on her way out, but the key stayed in her hand all the way home. All through the silent drive. All through the hours she sat at her kitchen table, staring at it, turning it over and over until the brass warmed to her body heat and felt like something alive. She didn't sleep. She just held the key and wondered what her mother had locked away, and why she'd left Miriam the only way to open it. 2 weeks passed before Miriam opened the donation box, not because she wasn't curious, because she was terrified of what curiosity might cost her. She spent those 14 days learning the rhythms of the Holloway, the creak of the floorboards near the front window, the way light moved through the store like something with weight, the silence that settled after dark and felt less like peace and more like held breath. She slept in the apartment above the shop. 1 room, a kitchenette, a bathroom with tiles that had probably been white in 1970. The mattress smelled like someone else's life. She didn't mind. Her own life didn't feel like it belonged to her anymore anyway. No one called. She didn't answer when they did. The brass key lived in her jacket pocket. She felt it every time she moved. A small, constant pressure against her ribs, like a second heartbeat she hadn't asked for. The donation box stayed exactly where she'd left it. On the desk in the back office. Dust motes circled it in the afternoons when the light slanted through the cracked blinds, turning the air gold and thick. She walked past it dozens of times a day, looked at it, looked away, chose not to know. She filled her hours with work that didn't matter, sorted inventory, priced chipped teacups and outdated encyclopedias, wiped down shelves, reorganized racks of clothing by color, then by season, then by color again, because reorganizing felt like control, and control felt better than the alternative. The store opened at 10, closed at 5. Most days no one came in. Miriam preferred it that way. On the 11th day, she found the receipt. She'd been cleaning out the filing cabinet, removing years of paperwork the previous owner had abandoned, wondering if any of it mattered, or if she should just burn it all and start fresh. The drawer stuck halfway. She yanked it hard, and when it finally gave, a cascade of yellowed invoices and donation slips scattered across the desk. Most were printed, generic, but one wasn't. Handwritten, blue ink. The letters neat and deliberate, slanting slightly to the right the way they always had when Nell was being careful, when something mattered enough to get it right. Donation, personal items, hold for pickup. And beneath that, in smaller script, do not open, do not discard. The date in the corner, October 14, 2023. Miriam's hands went still. The key in her pocket suddenly felt like it was burning through the fabric, through her skin, straight into bone. She read the receipt again, and again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense, as if her mother's handwriting might transform into someone else's. It didn't. Nell had been here, in this store, 1 week before she died. Nell, who lived 40 miles inland and hadn't mentioned a thrift shop, a donation, a locked box waiting for someone to find it. Neil, who'd raised Miriam alone after her father left, who'd worked at the library for 30 years, who kept her life small and quiet and controlled in a way that Miriam had once found comforting and later found suffocating. Nell, who never did anything without a reason. Miriam looked at the donation box. It sat there, patient, inevitable, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. The lock gleamed dully in the afternoon light. The dust motes had settled on the lid, a fine gray film that looked almost like frost. She tried to remember the last real conversation she'd had with her mother. Not the logistics. I said doctor's appointments, grocery lists, the weather. The last time they'd said something that mattered. She couldn't. The silence between them had been so long, so practiced, that Miriam had stopped noticing it. And now Nell was gone, and all that was left was this, a locked box and a receipt that proved her mother had secrets she'd chosen not to share. Miriam folded the receipt carefully and placed it next to the box. Then she sat down on the floor, her back against the filing cabinet, her knees pulled to her chest. The key was in her hand before she realized she'd taken it out of her pocket. She stared at it. Small, brass, ordinary. It would be so easy. Just turn the lock, lift the lid. No. But knowing had consequences. Knowing meant her mother had lied. Or at least hadn't told the truth. Knowing meant the version of Nell that Miriam had carried for 6 months. Quiet, predictable, gone but understandable, would shatter into something else. Something hidden. Miriam wasn't sure she could survive her mother becoming a stranger. So she sat there, on the floor of a thrift store she'd bought to run away from grief, holding a key she wasn't ready to use. The light through the blinds began to fade. The dust motes stopped moving, suspended in the dimness, caught between falling and floating. Miriam didn't move either. She just sat with the box, with the weight of it, with the question her mother had left behind, and the answer she was too afraid to uncover. The brass key grew warm in her palm. Outside, somewhere distant, the ocean pulled at the shore. Endless, patient, inevitable. Inside, Miriam held her breath and wondered how long she could keep holding it before something finally broke. Miriam opened the box at 2:17 in the morning because she couldn't breathe anymore with it locked. She'd tried to sleep, lasted 40 minutes before the key in her pocket felt like it was branding her hip bone, hot and insistent and impossible to ignore. She'd gotten up, paced the apartment, made tea she didn't drink, watched the clock tick past midnight, past 1, past the point where waiting became its own kind of violence. The store was dark when she came downstairs. She didn't turn on the lights, just used the beam from her phone to navigate the aisles, past the racks of other people's discarded lives, into the back office where the donation box sat exactly where it had always been, waiting, patient, inevitable. The brass key slid into the lock like it had been made for this exact moment. 1, turn, a soft click. The dust motes that had been circling the box scattered when she lifted the lid. A small explosion of gray particles catching the phone's light, swirling, no longer suspended, just moving, falling, alive. Miriam's hands shook. Inside the box, money, not bills, stacks of bills, rubber banded, aged. The edges soft and yellowed like old paper, but the ink still crisp, still real. $100 bills, 50s, 20s, methodically organized, packed tight. Miriam pulled out one stack, then another, then another. She counted. 15 bundles, each labeled in faded pencil on a small paper band. $1,000. Her breath came fast and shallow. Her vision tunneled. The phone slipped from her hand and clattered on the desk, the light bouncing wild across the ceiling before settling at an angle that turned everything into sharp shadows and two bright spots. $15 million in a thrift store, in a locked box, left by her mother 1 week before she died. Miriam's legs went liquid. She sat down hard on the floor, her back against the desk, stacks of cash scattered around her, like evidence of a crime she didn't understand. Nell was a librarian. She drove a 15-year-old Honda. She clipped coupons. She died with $1,200 in her checking account and a mortgage that took Miriam 3 months to pay off after the funeral. This wasn't possible. Miriam pressed her palms against her eyes, tried to think, tried to make the numbers mean something other than what they meant. Then she saw it. At the bottom of the box, beneath where the money had been, something else. Small, dark, soft, a blue velvet pouch. Miriam's hands were steadier when she reached for it. Maybe because she'd already shattered, already broken, and there was nothing left to protect. The velvet was worn smooth, the kind of soft that comes from decades of being touched, held, kept close. It weighed almost nothing. She loosened the drawstring and tipped the contents onto her palm. A driver's license, expired 1987. The plastic yellowed and cracked at the edges. The photo showed a young man. Dark hair, serious eyes, the faint suggestion of a smile, like he was trying not to give too much away. Devin Lowell. Miriam stopped breathing. She knew that name. Not well, not clearly, just whispered. A fragment from childhood, from late-night conversations she wasn't supposed to hear, from the way her mother's voice would go quiet and distant when someone mentioned the past. Devin Lowell, her mother's first love, the one who disappeared. There was more in the pouch, a photograph, 3 inches by 4, the edges soft and bent, the colors faded to something dreamlike. 2 blue sky, 2 green grass, the kind of saturation that only existed in the 1980s. 2 people, young, standing close, not touching, but the space between them hummed with it. Nell, maybe 22, her hair longer than Miriam had ever seen it, loose around her shoulders, her face unguarded in a way Miriam didn't recognize. She was laughing, laughing. Her head tilted back, her eyes bright, her whole body loose and open like she'd never learned to be careful yet. And beside her, Devin Lowell. The same serious eyes from the license, but softer here. Watching Nell like she was the only thing in the world worth watching. Miriam's throat closed. She'd never seen her mother look like that. Not once. Not in 38 years. There was a note, small, folded, the paper thin as tissue. Nell's handwriting, unmistakable. For when the truth comes looking. That was all. No explanation, no context, just a promise. Or a warning that someone would eventually find this. That the truth, whatever it was, had always been inevitable. Miriam sat in the dark surrounded by $15 million and the ghost of a woman she'd never met. Her mother, young and laughing and in love with someone who'd vanished from her life so completely that Miriam had only heard his name 3 times growing up. Devin Lowell. Who was he? Where did the money come from? Why did Nell hide it? Why did she leave it? And why did she never say a word? Miriam's hands curled around the photograph. She stared at her mother's face, at the openness there, the joy, the version of Nell that had existed before Miriam was born, before whatever happened that made her small and quiet, and so goddamn careful with everything, especially love. The brass key sat on the desk beside the empty box. It had unlocked nothing. It had unlocked everything. Miriam didn't know which was worse. She pulled out her phone, took photos of everything. The money, the license, the photograph, the note, evidence, proof. Something to hold on to when the morning came and she started doubting her own sanity. Then carefully, she put it all back. The blue velvet pouch, the stacks of cash, the brass key in the lock. She turned it, heard the click. The box was closed again, but nothing was locked anymore. Miriam stood. Her legs barely held her. She picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the only name that made sense. Harriet Finch. Attorney at law. The only lawyer in a town this small. The kind of woman who knew everyone's business and kept most of it to herself. If anyone knew about Devin Lowell, it would be her. Miriam sent the text before she could stop herself. I need to see you. It's about my mother and someone named Devin Lowell. The reply came 30 seconds later. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring coffee. Miriam locked the office door, climbed the stairs to the apartment, sat on the edge of the bed with the photograph still open on her phone. Her mother, young and laughing, standing next to a man who'd loved her enough to leave her $15 million and a truth she'd spent 35 years hiding. The dust motes in the bedroom window caught the first gray light of dawn. They weren't suspended anymore. They were falling, settling, landing, somewhere Miriam couldn't see yet but knew. Somehow she'd have to follow. Harriet Finch arrived at the Holloway at 9 p.m., not 9 a.m., because she said some conversations shouldn't happen in daylight. She was in her 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. She wore a wool coat even though it wasn't cold, and carried a leather briefcase that looked older than Miriam. Miriam had brought coffee anyway. 2 cups from the diner down the street. Harriet took hers black, sipped once and set it aside like she'd already forgotten it existed. Devin Lowell, Harriet said. Not a question, a confirmation. Miriam nodded. She'd set the blue velvet pouch on the counter between them. The driver's license, the photograph, Nell's notes spread out like evidence at a trial. Harriet picked up the license, held it to the light. Her expression didn't change, but something in her posture softened. Just barely. Just enough. My father was his lawyer, she said quietly. I was 23, fresh out of law school. I sat in on every hearing. Miriam's throat tightened. You knew him. I knew he was innocent. Harriet set the license down carefully, aligned it with the photograph. Everyone else knew he wasn't. That's how it works sometimes. She opened her briefcase, pulled out a manila folder, yellowed at the edges, the kind that had been sitting in a filing cabinet for decades, waiting for someone to remember it mattered. Devin Lowell was arrested in August 1985 for armed robbery. Convenience store on the edge of town. The clerk identified him, said she was certain. Devin said he was home that night, alone, no alibi. Harriet slid a document across the counter, a court transcript. The ink faded but still legible. Your mother testified for his character, said he was kind, honest, incapable of violence. The jury didn't believe her. He got 8 years. Miriam stared at the transcript, at her mother's name printed in small official type. Eleanor Ashford, witness for the defense. He served 2 years before the real perpetrator was arrested for another robbery and confessed to the first one. Devin was released, exonerated, The state issued an apology. Harriet's voice went flat. 6 months later, he was dead. Car accident, single vehicle, drove off the coast road in the rain. The room felt smaller, the air thicker. The state awarded a wrongful imprisonment settlement, $15 million, posthumous. Harriet pulled out another document. Older, the paper brittle. Devon had updated his will the week before he died, named your mother as his sole beneficiary. Miriam's hands went cold. She never claimed it. No. Harriet turned the document so Miriam could see. Nell's signature at the bottom, precise and deliberate. She had it transferred to a secure escrow account in 1988. Gave instructions that it was never to be touched unless she explicitly authorized it. Then she had all the paperwork sent here, to the Holloway. Miriam looked up. Why here? The store was owned by a woman named Margaret Finch, my aunt. She and your mother were friends years ago. Your mother asked her to hold the box. Said someday someone might come looking for it. Margaret kept it locked in the back office for 35 years. When she sold the store last year, she left it behind. Part of the sale. The pieces clicked into place like bones breaking. Miriam had bought the store, had bought the box, had bought her mother's buried truth without knowing it. Harriet folded her hands on the counter. Her voice was softer now, almost gentle. Your mother never spent $1 of that money. Lived her whole life like it didn't exist. Worked at the library. Raised you alone. Died with almost nothing. She paused. That takes a particular kind of conviction, or a particular kind of guilt. Miriam's vision blurred. She pressed her palms flat against the counter, grounding herself in the cool, solid surface. Why would she hide it? Her voice came out raw. If he left it to her, if he wanted her to have it. I don't know. Harriet's gaze was steady, unflinching. But I know your mother, knew her anyway. She was the kind of woman who believed she had to earn forgiveness, even when there was nothing to forgive. Miriam picked up the photograph, stared at her mother's face. Young, open, laughing. Standing beside a man who'd been wrongfully imprisoned, exonerated, and then died 6 months later, while the woman he loved watched from a distance, carrying his money like a stone around her neck for the rest of her life. She thought it was her fault, Miriam whispered. Harriet didn't answer, didn't need to. Miriam looked at Nell's note again. For when the truth comes looking. The truth wasn't the money. It wasn't even Devon. The truth was that her mother had spent 35 years punishing herself for surviving someone she'd loved, for doubting him when it mattered, for living when he didn't. The truth was that Nell had built her entire life around a locked box and a secret she couldn't carry and couldn't let go. And now she'd left it to Miriam. Not as inheritance, as release, or maybe as warning. Harriet packed the documents back into her briefcase. She finished her coffee in one long swallow, then stood. The money's legally yours now. Your mother made sure of that in her will. Everything she owned, including escrow accounts. You can claim it. Walk away. Burn it. Whatever you want. She paused at the door, looked back. But you should ask yourself why she left it for you. Why now? Why like this? The door closed softly behind her. Miriam stood alone in the dark store, surrounded by other people's discarded things, holding a photograph of a woman she'd never really known. Outside, the ocean pulled at the shore. Inside, the donation box sat on the desk in the back office, unlocked now, empty except for the weight of everything it had held for 35 years. Miriam's mother had spent a lifetime hiding, and Miriam had spent 6 months doing exactly the same thing. She set the photograph down. Her hands were steady now. The brass key sat beside it, no longer a mystery. Just a tool that had opened something Miriam wasn't sure she could close again. The truth had come looking, and Miriam realized, with a clarity that felt like drowning, that she had no idea what to do with it. Miriam drove to her mother's house at midnight because daylight felt like a lie. The new owners had moved in 3 months ago. Young couple. 2 kids. They'd repainted the shutters blue and planted flowers Nell would have never chosen. But the garage, the detached listing structure at the back of the property, they'd left alone. The side door was unlocked. Miriam didn't know if that made her a trespasser or just desperate. Inside, the air was thick with dust and motor oil, and the particular smell of things forgotten. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, swaying slightly in the draft from the open door. Miriam pulled the chain. The light was weak, but it was enough. Cardboard boxes lined the walls. Nell's handwriting on the sides in black marker. Books, kitchen, photos, donations. And in the back corner, half hidden behind a tarp, personal. Miriam's hands shook when she pulled the box toward her. The cardboard was soft with age, the edges splitting. Inside, journals, dozens of them, hardcover, spiral-bound, composition notebooks with marbled covers. Decades of her mother's interior life, catalogued and stored and never mentioned. Miriam sat on the cold concrete floor and opened the first one. The handwriting was younger, looser, the ink blue instead of black. August 12, 1985. They arrested Devon today. Miriam's throat closed. She turned pages, read entries in fragments, her eyes catching on phrases that felt like small detonations. August 15. The evidence is damning. I want to believe him. I don't know if I can. August 22. He asked me to testify, to vouch for his character. I said I would. I'm not sure I should. August 29. What if I'm wrong? What if everyone else is right? The pages blurred. Miriam wiped her eyes and kept reading. September 10. I testified today. Told him he was kind, honest, incapable of violence. I believed it when I said it. I think I believed it. September 12. Guilty verdict. 8 years. He looked at me when they read it. I couldn't hold his gaze. Miriam's breath came shallow and fast. Dust motes floated in the weak light above her, suspended, circling, like they'd been waiting for someone to disturb them. She skipped ahead. Found 1987. March 3, 1987. They released him today. The real thief confessed. Devon was innocent. I doubted him. I almost didn't testify. What does that make me? March 10. He called. I couldn't answer. How do I tell him I wasn't sure? How do I tell him I loved him and still thought he might be guilty? September 18, 1987. Devon is dead. Car accident. Coast Road. Rain. They said it was quick. I killed him. Not with my hands. With my doubt. With my silence after. I should have been there. I should have believed without question. I didn't. And now he's gone and I'm still here and I don't know how to live with that. Miriam's voice cracked when she spoke her mother's name aloud. Nell. It came out broken, raw. The sound of a daughter seeing her mother as human for the first time. Fallible, guilty, drowning in a shame she'd never spoken aloud. Miriam kept reading, entry after entry. Years of self-recrimination. Nell documenting every way she could have been. Better, stronger, more faithful. The settlement money appeared in 1988. Nell wrote about it like it was a body she was burying. I won't touch it. It's his. It's sacred. If I keep it locked away, maybe he's not really gone. Maybe I can hold on to the version of him that existed before I doubted. Before I failed. Miriam closed the journal, pressed it to her chest. Her mother had spent 35 years building a prison out of guilt. had lived small and quiet and controlled because she believed she didn't deserve anything else, had died without ever forgiving herself for being human enough to doubt someone she loved. And Miriam had watched her live that way, had thought it was just who Nell was. Careful, reserved, small. She hadn't known it was penance. Maybe guilt isn't something we carry. Maybe it's something we become. Slowly, silently, until we forget we ever lived any other way. If you've ever loved someone and doubted them in the same breath, stay here with me. Subscribe. Because some truths take a lifetime to surface, and we shouldn't face them alone. Miriam sat in the dim garage surrounded by boxes of a life her mother had carefully archived and hidden. She understood now. Nell hadn't left her money. She'd left her a choice, to keep hiding, or to finally, impossibly, let go. The brass key was still in Miriam's pocket. She'd unlocked the box, but she hadn't unlocked her mother. Not really, not until now. She gathered the journals, 1985 through 1987, and carried them out to her car. The rest she left behind. Someone else's past, someone else's burial ground. By the time she got back to the Holloway, it was nearly 3 a.m. The store was dark. The racks of donated clothes cast long shadows in the streetlight, coming through the window. Miriam sat on the floor of the back office, journals spread around her like evidence. The donation box sat on the desk above her, empty now, its lock open, its secrets finally spilled. She felt like one of the discarded things on the shelves. Something someone had loved once and then couldn't carry anymore. Her mother had hidden the money from the world, but really, she'd hidden it from herself, a way to keep Devon alive, untouched, sacred. A way to never move forward, to never forgive, to never stop punishing herself for the crime of being human. Miriam pressed her palms against the cold floor and wondered how long she'd been doing the same thing, hiding in a thrift store, surrounding herself with other people's abandoned lives because her own felt too heavy to hold, running from grief because staying still meant drowning in it. The dust motes had settled now. The air was thick and quiet and waiting. Miriam closed her eyes, and for the first time since Nell died, she let herself cry. Not for the mother she'd lost, but for the woman her mother had been before guilt turned her into something else. Someone young, laughing, in love. Someone who'd made one human mistake and spent the rest of her life paying for it. Someone who'd finally, in death, given her daughter permission to stop doing the same. Miriam read until the words blurred into one long confession. Entry after entry, year after year, Nell documenting her guilt like it was a living thing she had to feed, had to tend, had to keep alive, or risk forgetting why she deserved to suffer. By the time the first gray light crept through the front window of the Holloway, Miriam had read them all, every page about Devon, every line of self-recrimination, every desperate attempt to make sense of loving someone and doubting them in the same breath. She understood now. Her mother had never forgiven herself. The money wasn't inheritance. It was a prison Nell had built, brick by brick, year by year, until she couldn't remember what it felt like to live outside of it. And Miriam had been doing the same thing. She looked around the dark store. The racks of donated clothes, the shelves of abandoned dishes, the boxes of lives people had decided they couldn't carry anymore. She'd bought this place thinking it was an escape, a fresh start, somewhere to run to, but it wasn't. It was a cage, just like the locked box, just like the money Nell had refused to touch, just like the guilt both of them had wrapped around themselves until it felt like skin. Miriam stood slowly. Her legs ached from sitting on the floor all night. Her eyes burned, but her hands were steady now. She walked to the back office. The donation box sat on the desk where she'd left it, lid open, empty except for the blue velvet pouch she'd placed back inside. She picked up the pouch, held it in her palm, felt the weight of it. Not heavy, but present. Real. The driver's license. The photograph. Nell's note. For when the truth comes looking. The truth had come. And now Miriam had to decide what to do with it. She could lock it all back up. Pretend she'd never found it. Let the money sit untouched for another 35 years while she lived small and quiet and safe, just like Nell had. Or she could choose something else. She set the pouch down on the desk, deliberately, final. Then she whispered to the empty store, to the dust motes that hung suspended in the dawn light, to the ghost of her mother that still lived in every locked drawer and unopened envelope. I'm not going to carry this for you anymore, Mom. Her voice didn't crack this time. It was clear, certain, the sound of a woman who'd finally stopped running from the weight of someone else's guilt. She pulled out her phone, found Harriet Finch's number. It was barely 6 a.m., but Miriam didn't care. This couldn't wait. Waiting was what Nell had done. Waiting was what had turned love into penance and penance into a life half-lived. Harriet answered on the third ring. Miriam, I want to establish a foundation. Miriam's words came fast, sure, like she'd been rehearsing them all night without knowing it. A legal fund, for people who've been wrongfully convicted. I want to use Devon's settlement. All of it. Silence on the other end. Then, what are you calling it? The Lowell Ashford Innocence Fund. Miriam looked at the photograph still open on her phone. Nell and Devon, young and laughing, before everything broke. He never got to help anyone. The money just sat there for 35 years. I wanted to finally do what he didn't get the chance to. And your mother. Harriet's voice was gentle. What about honoring her choice to keep it locked away? Miriam closed her eyes. Felt the tears come again, but softer this time. Not grief. Something closer to release. My mother spent her whole life punishing herself for being human, for doubting someone she loved, for surviving when he didn't. She opened her eyes. The light through the window was stronger now, turning the dust motes gold. I'm not going to honor that. I'm going to honor the woman she was before the guilt. The one in the photograph. The one who loved him. Harriet was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'll draft the paperwork. Come by this afternoon. Thank you. Miriam. Harriet paused. Your mother would be proud. Or angry. Maybe both. Miriam almost laughed. Yeah, probably both. She hung up, set the phone on the desk beside the blue velvet pouch and the brass key and all the small objects that had held her mother's secrets for longer than Miriam had been alive. The donation box was empty now, truly empty, not waiting anymore, not holding anything back. Miriam took the brass key, the small, tarnished thing that had unlocked everything, and placed it inside the box one final time. Then she closed the lid, didn't lock it. Just let it rest there, finished. She walked to the front of the store and stood in the doorway, looking out at the street as the town began to wake. The ocean was 2 blocks away, pulling at the shore, relentless and patient. She felt lighter, not healed, not whole, but no longer suspended in the thick, choking silence of grief that had nowhere to go. The money would move now, would become something active, something alive. It would help people Devon had never met, people Nell had never known. It would stop being a monument to guilt and become what it should have always been: a tool, a bridge, a way forward. Miriam turned back to look at the hallway one more time before she locked the door and went upstairs to sleep for the first time in 36 hours. The dust motes were still there, caught in the morning light. But they weren't suspended anymore. They were falling, slowly, gently, landing on surfaces where they'd finally be still. Miriam closed the door behind her and felt, for the first time since Nell died, like she wasn't drowning, just breathing, just alive. 2 months later, the Holloway didn't look like a thrift store anymore. The racks of donated clothes were gone. The shelves of mismatched dishes, the boxes of strangers' lives, cleared out, donated elsewhere, given to people who needed them more than Miriam needed the weight of other people's pasts pressing against her own. The space was open now, clean. A few chairs arranged in a circle near the front window. A desk where a rotating roster of volunteer lawyers offered free consultations every Tuesday and Thursday. A corkboard on the wall, covered in flyers, support groups for families of the wrongfully accused, resources for navigating the legal system, stories of exoneration that ended in reunion instead of graves. The Lowell Ashford Innocence Fund had a website, a mailing address, a mission statement Miriam had written at 3 a.m. and revised 17 times until it felt true. We believe in second chances. In truth, that arrives late but still matters. In the people who wait decades for someone to finally say, "We were wrong, and you were right all along." Devon's settlement was working now, moving, helping. No longer locked away, no longer a monument to guilt. Just money doing what money should do. Opening doors, buying time, giving people a chance to breathe while someone fought for them. Miriam stood in the center of the empty store one evening in late autumn. The light outside fading to that particular gold that only exists for 20 minutes before the world tips into dusk. The air smelled different now, less like dust and old fabric, more like coffee and paper, and the faint trace of the lavender oil she'd started diffusing, because it reminded her of something she couldn't name but felt like peace. The donation box was still in the back office. She'd kept it. Not because she needed it, but because it felt wrong to throw away the thing that had held her mother's secrets for 35 years. It sat on the desk, lid open, empty. Sometimes people used it to drop off donations for the legal fund. Checks, cash, handwritten notes of encouragement. Miriam emptied it once a week and brought the contents to the bank. The box didn't haunt her anymore. It was just a box. She sat down at the desk as the light outside deepened, pulled out a piece of paper, plain white, unlined, and a pen she'd been carrying in her pocket for 3 days, waiting for the right moment. The right moment never came, so she decided this one would have to do. She wrote slowly, carefully, the way Nell used to write when something mattered. "Dear Devon, I never met you, but I feel like I know you anyway. Or at least I know what you left behind. You love my mother. She loved you. I've seen the photograph. I've read her journals. I know she doubted you when she shouldn't have. And I know she spent the rest of her life trying to make up for it. I don't think you would have wanted that. I don't think you would have wanted her to carry your memory like a stone. But that's what she did. And now I'm the one who gets to decide what to do with it. So I'm giving it away. The money. All of it. To people who deserve what you deserved. Someone to believe them. Someone to fight for them. Someone to stand up and say, the world was wrong, and you were right. I hope that's okay. I hope wherever you are, you're not angry that I didn't keep it locked up like she did. I hope you understand that I'm not dishonoring her choice. I'm just choosing differently. Thank you for loving her, for being innocent when the world said you weren't, for leaving behind something that could still save people, even after you were gone. I think she loved you until the day she died. I think maybe that's why she kept the money, not as punishment, as proof Proof that you were real, that what you had was real, that love doesn't stop just because someone leaves. I'm letting you go now, both of you. I hope that's what she wanted all along. Miriam. She folded the letter once, then twice, until it was small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. The blue velvet pouch was on the shelf behind her, tucked between a chipped vase someone had donated and a stack of old legal journals Harriet had dropped off last week. Miriam had placed it there deliberately. Not hidden, not displayed, just present. Part of the landscape, part of the history of this place. She opened the pouch, slipped the letter inside with the driver's license, the photograph, Nell's note. Then she pulled the drawstring closed and set it back on the shelf. Among other people's forgotten things, but not forgotten, just released. Miriam stood, walked to the front of the store, looked out at the street as the last of the daylight faded and the streetlights flickered on, one by one, patient and automatic. She didn't feel haunted anymore. Not by Nell. Not by Devon. Not by the $15 million or the 35 years or the weight of someone else's guilt she'd almost let become her own. She felt present, solid, here, like someone who'd spent 6 months running from grief and finally stopped long enough to realize she didn't have to carry it all, that some things could be set down, some things could be given away, some things could just rest. She locked the front door, turned off the lights, climbed the stairs to the apartment above the store where she'd learned to sleep without nightmares, where the mattress didn't smell like someone else's life anymore, because it smelled like hers. The donation box sat in the dark office below, empty and unlocked. The blue velvet pouch sat on the shelf, holding a letter that would never be mailed, and a photograph of two people who'd loved each other before the world taught them to be careful. And Miriam lay in bed, listening to the distant sound of the ocean. Steady, relentless, pulling at the shore the way it always had, the way it always would. And felt for the first time in longer than she could remember, like she wasn't drowning, just floating, just breathing, just alive. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in early spring, 6 months after the Lowell Ashford Innocence Fund had quietly begun its work. Miriam almost missed it. The mail carrier had left it wedged between a stack of donation receipts and a flyer for a hardware store that had been closed for 5 years. The envelope was plain, white, no return address, just a postmark from Oregon, and handwriting that slanted forward like it was leaning into hope. Miriam opened it standing at the counter where she'd first found the brass key. The same light slanted through the front window, turning the air gold. Dear Miss Ashford, my name is Elena Ruiz. I don't know if you remember my case. I was wrongfully convicted of fraud 12 years ago. I lost everything. My job, my home. My daughter was 3 when they took me away. She's 15 now. Your foundation helped fund my appeal. New evidence, new lawyers, people who believed me when no one else would. Last week, the conviction was overturned. I walked out of that courthouse a free woman. My daughter was waiting for me. She's taller than I am now. I didn't recognize her at first, but she knew me. She said she never stopped knowing me. I don't know who Devon Lowell was, but because of him, I get to meet my daughter again. Not as a memory, as a person, as my child. Thank you for giving his story a second life, for turning something that ended in grief into something that begins with reunion. I thought you should know. Elena. Miriam read the letter 3 times before her vision blurred. She pinned it to the wall behind the counter, right next to the photograph of Nell and Devon that she'd framed and hung there a month ago. 2 people laughing. 1 woman finding her daughter. All of it connected by money that had sat locked away for 35 years, waiting for someone to finally let it breathe. Miriam understood now. Her mother hadn't left her money. She'd left her permission. Permission to stop hiding. Permission to stop punishing herself for surviving. Permission to take something born in guilt and transform it into something that could save people Nell had never met, in ways she'd never imagined. The inheritance wasn't wealth. It was release. And Miriam had finally claimed it. She closed the store early that evening, locked the front door, walked the 2 blocks to the beach as the lights softened into that particular blue that comes just before dusk. The near ocean was calm, the tide pulling back, slow and patient, the way it always did. Miriam stood at the edge of the water, reached into her pocket, pulled out the brass key she'd been carrying for 8 months. Small, tarnished, worn smooth by her hands, it had unlocked everything. The donation box, the truth, her mother's buried life, the pattern of grief that had almost become Miriam's life too. She didn't need it anymore. She held it up to the fading light, watched it catch gold for half a second before the shadows claimed it. Then she whispered to the ocean, to the sky, to the ghost of her mother who no longer haunted her, "I'm not locked anymore." She threw the key. It arced through the air, caught the light one last time, then disappeared into the water with a small, final splash that was swallowed immediately by the sound of waves. The tide pulled back. The key was gone. Miriam felt lighter, not because the weight had disappeared, because she'd finally learned how to set it down. She turned away from the ocean, started walking back toward town, toward the Holloway, toward home. Not a cage, not a hiding place, just a place where truth lived, where it breathed, where it waited to be given away to people who needed it more than Miriam needed to keep it locked inside her chest, like her mother had. The streetlights flickered on as she walked, one by one, patient and automatic. By the time she reached the Holloway, the sky was deep blue verging on black, and the first stars were beginning to show. She unlocked the door, stepped inside, turned on a single lamp. The store was quiet, the chairs arranged in their circle, the corkboard full of stories, the donation box sitting on the desk in the back office, empty except for the small offerings people left, hope folded into envelopes, belief written in shaky handwriting. Miriam stood in the center of the room and looked up. Dust motes floated in the lamplight, but they weren't suspended anymore. Not caught, not held. They were falling, slowly, gently, landing on surfaces where they'd finally rest. Miriam watched them settle, watched them find their places, watched them stop moving and just be. She thought about Nell, about Devon, about Elena Ruiz and her daughter, about all the people the foundation would help in the years to come, about locked boxes and brass keys and the particular weight of loving someone and doubting them in the same breath, about how guilt can become identity if you let it, how grief can become a cage if you build it carefully enough, how some inheritances are meant to be spent, not saved, about how her mother had spent 35 years locked away, and how Miriam had spent 8 months learning to open the door. She turned off the lamp, climbed the stairs, lay in bed, listening to the distant ocean pulling at the shore. She didn't feel haunted anymore, didn't feel suspended, didn't feel like something waiting to fall. She felt like something that had already landed, something that had found its place, something alive. The dust motes in the bedroom window caught the last of the streetlight. They didn't float. They fell. They landed. They rested.